Hello everyone. So today is finally the day. This has been a video that has been very much requested over the years of my channel. And I'm finally at a place where I feel like I know enough about rooting to share with you guys everything. It's going to be probably a longer video because there is so much involved when it comes to rooting, how to begin, and just the whole process. So I'm going to try to explain every single thing that I know, every hint that I have for you guys. And if I do forget something or you do still have a question about rooting, feel free to ask that question in the comments, but please make sure if it's a question that's already been answered, just watch the video again. I'm going to try to do it where it tells you which part of the video is what question, like what part of the video is what part of the rooting process. It'll make sense if I can figure out how to do that. Some YouTube videos, they have been able to make it so you can click to a part in the video that you need to go to instead of watching the whole video over again. So yeah, keep in mind that I am in no way the best rooter. I am still trying to work on my skills personally, but like I said, this video has been requested, and I just think I know enough now to be able to talk about this. And I've been, rooting for about a year and a half. I didn't start rooting as soon as I started painting because I was not ready to do so. So it was intimidating. There was like one maybe good video about rooting, and even then that video did not go over everything that I'm going over in this video. So it was a lot of trial and error and talking to other artists who have been doing this for longer than I have. But I wrote out a whole bunch of like notes for this so that I can go over everything and not try to forget anything. Right now you're looking at little Miss Manuela. She's the next baby I will be rooting, and like I said in the last video, she's a personal collection doll. She's going to have red hair. It's the first time I'm going to be rooting with red hair. It's more like auburn, so not bright red. I'll show you that in a second when I get to talking about hair. So first, let's talk about what is rooting. This is probably a great question to start with because a lot of people who are coming into this video don't even know that it's called rooting. Rooting is basically inserting hair into your reborn doll with these needles, which I will show you and discuss the needles in a bit. But yeah, that's what rooting is. You're basically just adding hair to your baby. And there is different versions of rooting, which I think is important to note because it gets like mixed up a lot. So I do what is called micro rooting, which is about 2 to 7 hairs per follicle, so per hole. That is different, very different than mono rooting. Mono rooting, as the name suggests, mono means one. So that is 1 hair per hole. That takes a lot of skill and a lot of patience, and I just personally do not do mono rooting. I find that it's just a lot of work for not my purposes where I am in my skills right now. So this is what I'm talking about right now. Rooting in general is just inserting the hair into the holes. Now that is just the name of it. But like I said, that's the difference between micro rooting versus mono rooting. So the next question to ask after you have now learned what rooting is and the difference between micro rooting versus mono rooting is, where do you buy supplies? Now this is a general list that can apply to all Reborn supplies. These are legitimate companies that have all sorts of reborning tools and kits. Blank kits, legit kits, real copies of kits. These are great websites to start off with. A lot of them have a starter kit if you're learning how to paint for the first time and you want to get everything you need. But yes, these sites are excellent and they are legitimate websites, which is the most important things. to note, because you don't want to get scammed or you don't want to buy an illegal copy of a doll. Reborning is not cheap, and reborn kits are not cheap. So please make note of that. You will never find a cheap reborn kit on like Amazon or eBay. That's a legitimate kit. These are all legitimate sites and great places to start. So those sites are McPherson's Crafts, just in case you can't read my handwriting, McPhersonsCrafts.com, Irresistibles.com, DollsSoReal.com, DollsBySandy.com, and BountifulBaby.com. So that's not all the sites, but those are the main 5 that I personally use for supplies, and I haven't had any issues with shipping or anything with any one of them. Well, McPherson's, one time I had an issue with a kit taking a really long time, but that's because they are in Canada, and if you don't choose the free shipping option, if you spend over $100, it can take a long time for the supplies to get to you. But any other time I've shipped from them, I use the free shipping option, so I spend over $100, and I get my items usually from McPherson's next day. They have the fastest shipping that I've found. Anyway, so now that you know where to buy supplies, you need to know what supplies you need. And I'm going to go over that now because this is complicated, of course. So needles. What do I mean by needles? There are lots of different types of rooting needles. They are different sizes, thicknesses, and they have different shapes. So the main 2 shapes that you will see on almost all Reborn supply companies are the crown needle and the forked needle. So these are 2 main shapes. I won't go over all the additional shapes because we'll be here all day, but these are the main shapes that you need to know. So the crown needle, as you can see, the notch is on the side of the needle, and the forked has the notch at the end of the needle. So I will show you a real example of a crown needle because that is what I use. I use crown needles, and they're very different. So forked needles are a little bit more difficult to use as a beginner because you have to really get it right in order to catch the hairs. So the crown needles and the forked needles, they do come with different amount of barbs. And the barbs are what are the notches. That's what they call them, barbs. So the more barbs you have, the more hairs you'll grab, and the less thinner then you can root. So to get the best results, you want the least amount of barbs. So my preferred needle of choice is either a 42 gauge crown needle with 3 barbs, which is 1 barb per side because the needles are triangular. I will show you that in a second. And I use 42 gauge or 46 if I'm really trying to get a thinner look. Now you hear me saying 42 gauge or 46 gauge. Now the gauge means how wide that needle is, how thick that needle is. The higher the number, the thinner the needle is. That can be really tricky, especially for beginners to understand. It's the same thing as like injection needles. The higher the number of the gauge, the thinner the needle. So for my example, I used a 42 gauge needle is thinner than a 38 gauge needle. And the thickness of the needle really matters, because if you get a needle that is too thick, it will leave big holes in the vinyl or silicone or whatever you're rooting. So you want to get a thinner needle. For beginners, I recommend no larger than a 38 gauge needle. Now, needles, this is important about needles, they will become dull over time, even if they do not break. This is important to note because you're poking holes through the vinyl. Over time, they will become dull, and you need to replace them, because then if you don't, they will stop piercing the vinyl properly, and you will stop being able to root with them. Now let me show you an example of a needle, and I'm going to try to get zoomed in as close as possible. Don't know how close I will get, but these are 42 gauge crown needles, and they have 3 barbs. So let's see how close I can get to you guys. Okay, it wants to focus on her is the issue. Let's see. I think I'm gonna have to turn her that way so I can try to get it to focus. There we go. Get you guys in here nice and close. I don't know how well you can see. It's kind of hard to do this portion of it, but I wanted to try to bring you guys in really close. I'm going to manually focus. I was trying to autofocus it. Let's see. Give me a little patience, you guys. Sorry about that. Let's see if I can really focus. Oh no, it still doesn't want to focus. Let me pause. Okay, let's try this. Let's see if it'll do any sort of focusing. It's really hard because the needle's so thin. Alright, so here is the needle. You see that's a flat side, that's a flat side, and that's a flat side. So you can see how it's triangular in shape. Now I don't know if my camera is good enough to focus on where the notches are, but on the side of each one of these sides there is a notch. It really does not want to focus, but it looks basically like that picture I showed you guys, which is why I drew it out that way, because I had a feeling it was too thin for my camera to want to really focus on where each notch is. But trust me, there are notches on there, and it looks just like that picture that I drew, but that's a really zoomed in, obviously, version of that. So that's what you need to know about needles. And if you have any other questions about needles specifically that I did not answer, go ahead and ask them below. But we will get into more about the needles, because there is a little bit other thing that you need to know about this particular needle, especially this end right here. Again, does not want to focus. See, that end is what we're going to talk about soon. I don't know if it's next. No, I'm just going to talk about hair next. Okay, so moving on. The next thing you need to know before you start rooting, this is all before you begin rooting, this is what you need to know. There are 3 different types of hair that most artists use, and they have different purposes depending on the doll that you're rooting. So the most common types of hair are human hair, mohair, and alpaca hair. Mohair is usually goat hair. I think it's only goat hair. And that's what I use 99% of the time. Because human hair, while it has its benefits in that it can withstand more heat and can be styled more different ways, human hair is thick. It's way thicker per strand than mohair or alpaca hair. Alpaca hair is the finest hair that most artists will use. It's really, really thin, and it's not for beginners at all. But yes, human hair, I only recommend for older babies, so like toddler or crawling age babies, because I see this mistake all the time where new people who just started rooting will use human hair, and it's just way too thick for newborns, and it makes them look like they're wearing a wig. It just does not look realistic because it's just too thick. Like I said, I use mohair, and the mohair brand I use is Slumberland Nursery. They have the best quality for the price that I have found so far. And mohair, because it's goat hair, it comes in different ages based on the age of the goat that the hair was sheared from. So there's kid, yearling, and fine adult. The kid mohair is what I use most of the time because it is the softest, it's the thinnest, and it's the curliest. Now, yearling is great. I use yearling sometimes too, and I don't use fine adult for my dolls because I mostly make newborns. So I want to use that thinner hair, that softer hair, that baby soft hair. Now, there are cheap mohairs that you will see at some of those websites that I provided for you. Avoid them at all costs because they are poor quality. You will feel it. They're rough, they're dry, and they break easily. And it's horrible when you're starting to root and your hairs that you're using just keep breaking. So the cheaper mohairs that I'm talking about are the brands like Ruby Red. There's another brand, but if you're looking at mohair and it's like really cheap, like I'm talking about $7 for 1/4 of a ounce, that's too cheap for good quality if you're buying from those sites that I recommended. That's another thing I should mention. Mohair goes a long way, so you don't need to order a bunch of mohair if you're only rooting a few dolls. This is 1/4 ounce of mohair, and this will last me probably 2 to 3 dolls for reference. So you don't need a bunch of mohair. Now, most mohairs are dyed to be that color that they are. And because of this, sometimes during the dyeing process, the dye isn't properly washed out, and you might get some transfer or bleeding of the mohair dye, especially with the darker colors. In order to get rid of this or make this not happen, you might want to gently wash the mohair. I know some artists recommend boiling the mohair. I don't typically do that because I find that Slumberland Nursery mohair doesn't really bleed anyway. So it's never really been necessary for me to boil the hair before using it. So you will see on a lot of these supply sites that there are mohair conditioners. And now, I will say I have not used a mohair conditioner because I have found it not necessary. You might find it necessary if you've had a doll for a while and the mohair feels dry to the touch or brittle. You might find it necessary then to purchase mohair conditioner, which can be found on those sites that I provided. But in general, I have had no need to use it because the mohair that I use is so silky soft that it's just not necessary. Okay. Now, let us get into beginning to talk about the rooting process itself. So before you even begin to root, you will want to 100% map out the hair pattern, which I will just refer to as mapping. This means basically drawing the hair pattern that you want your doll to have, the flow of the hair. Now, there are some great videos on mapping patterns, so I won't go into great detail about that, but I will link those videos in the description. So if you want to go watch those videos to see someone actually map out a head step by step, I strongly recommend doing that. But what I will let you know about this process, that there are different ways to map out a reborn doll's pattern. There are Prisma pencils, which you can use, and make sure you varnish the doll before you do that if you're using heat set paints, so that you can remove the Prisma pencil off after you're done rooting the doll. If you don't do that, you might not be able to remove the pencils, and there will just be these lines all over the head, which may or may not be a big deal depending on how thickly you have rooted. Now, what I use right here is a washable fabric marker. I got this tip from a fellow artist, and have not gone back since. Now this does wash off with water, so if you're working on a doll, it will come off easily, but you just redraw it back as it comes off. But it comes right off, which is why I like it, because when I give them their final rinse, there's no lingering lines or anything on that head. And the other option is chalk, just your regular school chalk. The issue with chalk is it comes off way too easy for me personally, and so I just don't use it anymore. But that is what I started to use before I used the washable fabric markers. It's a great option if you don't have access to these washable fabric markers. I got my fabric marker from Walmart. I think it was like $1. And yeah, way worth it to me. It marks blue, so if you're doing darker skin tones, it might not show up as easily on that skin tone. But you should still be able to see it. I've done darker dolls with that marker. Okay, next you want to heat your head. Now, a lot of artists do the old school way where they just heat up a sock that has rice in it and they place it inside the head. Now the issue with this is you're gonna have to keep taking out that sock with rice and heating it up every time it gets cold, and plus the rice smells like rice, so it smells weird. I don't recommend doing that at all. What I recommend, strongly recommend, is these lamps. They are Himalayan salt lamp replacements switches, and I recommend this because for several reasons. It fits right inside the head perfectly, and they have these clamps that hold it still in the head, and they are dimmable. This is the key. You can control how bright the light is, which controls how hot your head gets. Now this is important because you do not, on any circumstances, I made this mistake a few times, you do not want your head to get too hot because it will melt the vinyl. It will definitely melt your vinyl, so you have to be careful. I turn mine about halfway and that seems to do the job. The reason why you want to heat your head is because vinyl comes in a lot of different softness, and 99% of the time the heads are too hard, the vinyl is too hard to root cold, and that if you don't heat it, you will break a bunch of needles. You have to have your head soft enough to root, or else your needles will you'll just fly through all of the needles that you have, and needles are not cheap, so you definitely want to try to save as many as you can and use as many as you can. Not use as many as you can, I should say. But yes, you want to heat your head carefully, and that's how I do mine. Okay. So yes, now you're at the point where you've got your hair mapped out, the pattern you want. You've started heating your head, and now you want to set up your head in a way that will eliminate the amount of movement that head does while you're rooting. So as you can see, she's set up nicely. And how I do it is it's literally just a travel pillow. I got it for like $4. And then I put it over top of it a light colored blanket, because the mistake that I made once was I didn't use a light colored blanket, and the dye from the pillow got onto the vinyl and I couldn't get it off. So if you have a travel pillow that happens to have a design like this one, please make sure that you put something over top of it. It could be a soft blanket like I'm using, or it could be a towel. Just something to put a barrier between the vinyl and that design. So that's how I set up my doll. I use this travel pillow with the blanket, and then usually I sit up propped like on my couch or my bed. Yes, I do root in my bed sometimes when I'm feeling especially tired. I'll sit up in my bed and I'll root, or I'll sit up in my new studio and I'll root in there. And you just want to make sure you're comfortable because for me personally, I root for hours at a time. And so you want to make sure that you're being kind to your body, because that is another important thing. You don't want to put strain on your body, because that will cause lots of problems later on in your life, with arthritis and, just joint strain in general. So if you're feeling like you're getting tired, like your arms and your wrists and your fingers are starting to hurt, it might be time to take a break from rooting for a little bit. And additionally, like I said, make sure you have great posture while you're rooting. Your back will thank you in the long run. That's a thing that I feel like a lot of artists don't talk about, is how to root safely for your body. Okay, so now we're going to talk about holding the rooting needle. So this goes also into, being careful, making sure you're holding the needle properly so that you don't hurt yourself and that you can control the needle, because that is very important. Obviously, wherever you place the needle is where the hair is going to go. So most needles come uncut. Now, like I showed you earlier, this needle is uncut. Oh, it doesn't want to focus again, but you see that that is what an uncut needle looks like. There are some needles you can buy that are already cut, but it doesn't, because I don't use them cut. You can buy them cut, or you can cut them yourself with wire cutters, because that's how you place them into tools to hold your needles. Now, there's different types of tools that you can buy to hold your needles, which I'm going to describe in a second. But basically, they're mushroom, pin, and do-it-yourself. The mushroom holder looks like that, and you can buy those again from most Reborn supply companies. The pen one you can buy from like Michael's, and some Reborn companies have them, but they're basically shaped like a little pin, and you just stick the needle in there and it holds it nice and tight for you. And then DIY, a lot of artists make their own holders for their needles so it fits perfectly in their hand comfortably. You can use clay, like clay that you can bake, to do that. I personally do not use any of these options. I personally find it way easier to control by using the needles as they are, uncut, and use silicone finger protectors that I got from Dollar Tree. And I place those on my 2 fingers, and I hold the needle like this. And that is how I find that I get the best control over the needles. I pinch the needles like that with the silicone protectors to keep myself from getting too many blisters from long-term rooting for hours. So this is very important. So if you're going to pay attention to anything about the rooting process, this is the thing you want to, if you're taking notes, star it, bold it, underline it, highlight it. This is very important, very, very important. The angle in which you hold your needle makes a huge difference on how your rooting turns out. Now, if you hold your needle at a 90-degree angle, perpendicular to the vinyl surface, this is very bad. This is not good. The hair will stick straight up. And that's a big mistake that a lot of beginners make. Your hair will stick straight up and it'll look crazy. It'll look like that doll thing from what's that movie? Gosh. Toy Story. If you know what I mean, you know what I mean. It'll look crazy. It'll look like those dolls that you see at stores where it's just bad, like hair sticking right up. 90-degree angle is a big no-no. About a 25-degree angle is not as horrible, but you risk your hair slipping right back out because it doesn't go through the vinyl all the way. When you're rooting, you want your hair to go all the way through the vinyl and to the other side, because that's how you glue the hair in when you are finished, which I will go over later. But yes, you want to not try to do a 25-degree angle because that will not be great. It'll just come right out. The proper angle to hold your needle is at a 45-degree angle. This will ensure that your hair gets all the way through the vinyl surface and that it will not stick straight up, and it will lay nicely how hair should. So I hope those diagrams helped a lot, but that is very, very important when you're trying to start the rooting process. Now, this is also something that I was never explained, but this is why the angle matters so much, because how rooting works is the barbs, those notches that I explained earlier, will grab a strand of the hair, or strands, several strands it can be, and pull it through the surface of the vinyl into the inside of the head. So in order to successfully root a hair, you actually must catch the hair for it to actually root. And so in order to do that, the way I do it is I will get my needle and I will actually line up the ends of the hair, and make sure you're using the correct end of the hair. Hair has two ends, the bottom, like the tip of the hair, and the root. You want to root from the root, which is basically where the name came from. So here I have the root of the hair. I usually trim this so it's perfectly straight. As you can see here, that's the end of the hair, the root of the hair, and I normally trim this so it's perfectly straight across before rooting it into the head. Now, what I do is I make sure that I'm at the root. I'm trying to make sure I get you guys situated. I'm not going to actually root because this isn't the color I'm using for her hair, but I wanted to show you with a darker color. But basically, let me zoom in and tilt you guys a little bit. So what you're wanting to do is line up the end of the hair to the end of the needle, and then you're going to push it through, and that's rooting. I actually accidentally rooted a piece of hair there, but you can't really see it. But yes, like I said, it's really hard to describe. You place the end of the hair to the tip of the needle and you push through. And that is how you're going to catch a hair. I almost never do not catch hairs when I do that technique, rooting from the end of the root of the hair. Now, there's other techniques of rooting hair. Some people do this with the hair. They root from a loop. I personally do not do that unless I am doing eyelashes, because when you root from a loop, you get way more hairs per hole, and that's where it gets into the territory of looking pluggy, which I will explain what that means when I'm talking about the common mistakes and the troubleshooting. So you don't want to use the root-a-loop technique. It's easier, but it does not give a great look to the hair. So yeah, use the end of the hair and root from that properly, and that will get you pretty good results. Okay, now that we've finished explaining how to root, how to start rooting, you're going to want to continue to root like that from the end until your head is finished. And now, the next important thing to know is you have to, on vinyl dolls, you have to glue the hair in so that it does not come out over time. Or if it does, it doesn't come out a lot over time. There are a lot of different options to use for glue. Different artists like different things, and that's all great if that works for you. A lot of the more common options are Gem Tac, E6000, and Mod Podge. I use Gem Tac because it's waterproof and it dries relatively quickly. But even then, I allow my glue to dry in the head for at least 12 hours before assembling. And I will wait for that glue to dry before I trim the hair, which is the next step. Yeah, I just want to make sure that that glue is dry so no hairs pull out when I'm going to trim the hair. Like I said, different people use different things, but those are the most common glues that I find. that artists use. Okay. Now, let's talk about trimming really quickly. After your glue dries, it's time to give that hair a nice trim and style. I use these small little craft scissors that I got from Dollar Tree, and they are amazing. They are so sharp, they cut really nicely, and you can get really close cuts. And I use my fingers as a guide. What I mean by that is I will say, oh, I want this hair this certain length, and I will cut 2 fingers high or 1 finger high. It's kind of hard to show you without having a rooted doll in front of you, but there are, again, videos on specifically trimming reborn hair, so I won't go over that in excess, but I use these little scissors. They are perfect, and they're so nice and small. For reference, here's my hand. And they work amazing because they're nice and sharp and get right on those hairs. And like I said, I use my fingers as a reference for how long I want the hairs. That way I get an even cut all the way through. And I will also link a video about more specifically about trimming hair. Now, be careful when you're trimming not to pull the hairs. Even if your glue is dry, if you pull too hard, the hairs will come out. That's important to know too. Now, some artists debate on whether you should trim the hair wet or dry. I do a little bit of both, so I can't really just tell you which one is better. Most of the times I do my first trim with the hair dry, and then I'll do a second trim with the hair wet, just so I can see how it lays. Now, the last portion of this video is going to be talking about common mistakes in troubleshooting. So basically, these are questions that I have people ask that come up all the time, or questions that I had that were never answered by these types of videos. So I've answered this question in this video already, but if your reborn's hair is particularly brittle, or is falling out easily, or is just dry, you want to first check the quality of your hair. If you have one of those cheap brands, that would be your answer. That is why that hair is like that. And again, try conditioner if all else fails. You want to avoid doing conditioner if you can, because that's adding oils to the hair, and that could actually ruin the hair long term. The hair won't stay in when rooting. I also kind of went over this as well. You want to check the needle angle. If you are at a 25-degree angle, about around there, that would be the reason why your hair is not staying in. Or you need to make sure that you're actually lining up properly to catch the hairs, like I explained. Or it could be the firmness of the head. If the head is too soft or too hard, actually. Either way, if either extreme, your hairs will not stay in that head. Needles keep breaking. Check the quality of those needles. If you buy those really cheap needles, I do not recommend at all buying needles from Bountiful Baby. They are cheap and they break like crazy. So check the quality of your needles. Make sure you get some good, decent, strong needles. And then again, check the firmness of that head. If your head is too hard, your needles will break. And then check the force and angle of your rooting. If you are rooting too aggressively, of course, that's going to break your needle. And if the angle is wrong, like if you're at that 90-degree angle, you are way more likely to break a needle at that case. Or you're grabbing too many hairs. This right here is the most common beginner mistake that I see. This leads to what I call pluggy hair. A lot of people call it pluggy hair. I'm not the only one. But it's pluggy, meaning that there's way too many hairs per holes. And you go into that issue of where it looks like that doll from Toy Story, or it looks like a doll from Walmart, or it looks like a wig. So the issue, that is a big issue. It's a big mistake, and I hope you guys learn from that and do not do this. But the reason why that happens is there's like more than seven hairs per hole, like a bunch of hairs per hole. or the hair is too thick. So what you want to do is try to use a smaller needle with less barbs, like I explained in talking about the needles, or try smaller portions of the hair that you choose to root at a time. So don't grab a whole bunch of hair at a time. Try to grab like smaller portions, like, you know, smaller portions of hair instead of a big bundle of hair to root from. And then if all else fails, if you're still getting too many hairs per hole, like a whole bunch of hairs per hole, use some nail tweezers to remove those extra hairs before you glue everything in. I already explained this, the mohair leaking dye, so you can review that and read this if you can read my handwriting. Now, this is another one that I may seem self-explanatory, but rooting can be boring. It can be very, very boring, very time-consuming, very repetitive, which a lot of people actually find meditative, that it's so repetitive. But if you're like me, sometimes, a lot of times, you get bored while you're rooting. And I definitely have some suggestions for that, of course. And I suggest you watch or listen to a show, because you want to pay attention to where your hairs are going. So you really can't watch a show, but you can listen to a show or movie. Personally, I watch like shows that you don't have to pay super hard attention to, just something that's background. You can listen to a podcast, which I do a lot as well, or music. Or you can have a conversation. So if you live with people, I don't have anyone I live with, but if you had someone you're living with, you can have a great conversation with them while you're rooting, or, you know, talk to someone on the phone. You could talk to someone, and that way you're entertaining yourself, you're entertaining someone else, and you're getting your rooting done that you needed to get done. So that is all that I have to say for now for you guys. And like I said, if you have any other questions that I did not cover in this really long video, please make sure to let me know in the comments below, or you can email me at unireborndad.com. At gmail.com. There we go. Or unireborndad on Facebook or Instagram. I hope you guys found this super helpful, and I will see you guys in the next video.